Speaker number 2 is Dr. Michael Alexander. Problems have all one thing in common. They can't be solved with traditional thinking. That is why they are problems. Solving problems requires approaching them in new and creative ways. It requires looking for solutions in places one hasn't looked before. If one focuses on a problem with laser-like focus, one is likely to miss the solution, which is right next to them. The search for solutions in the wrong place can be best solved by changing the focus and finding the solution. Dr. Michael Alexander was trained by his father, the inventor of the barcode, to look at problems with a different and flexible perspective. His free-range thinking techniques have solved problems in a variety of fields, from energy to better negotiations to surviving life-threatening situations. In today's talk, he will explain the essence of the technique to enable the audience to look and solve problems with new perspectives as they change the focus. Title is Change the Focus. Find the solution, change the focus, find the solution. Let's make sure we have the right amount of timing. Is that 18 to 20, Michael?
Yes.
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, my own personal words of introduction would be, I have seen you speak in person and you definitely represented us well.
Do you want 16, 18, 20 or 18, 19, 20?
18, 19, 20.
Thank you.
Okay. Change the focus, find the solution, Dr. Michael Alexander.
I had been invited to do a scuba dive off of an oil rig. This is an amazing and complimentary opportunity because it is a very complicated dive. We had a chance to get out. Our group met together. We began to descend 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet. It's beautiful. The fish, the various growths on the side of the legs, just unbelievably beautiful experience of a lifetime. And so we continue to 70 feet, 80 feet, 90 feet. And we looked around, checked with each other, made sure everybody was okay. We made sure everybody had enough air. And then we began to descend. Well, they did. I looked down and I got vertigo. I couldn't tell up from down. The oil rig was spinning all around me like I was inside of it, which I wasn't. What does a scuba diver do in a situation like this? They die. They take one of two options. They either go the wrong way, not knowing which way is which, and descend further until they run out of air, or they go upward in a panic so fast that as the water pressure around them decreases, the air in their lungs begins to expand to the point where their lungs explode. But my father didn't raise me to die that easily. And so I stopped and I said to myself, I don't know which way's up, but the bubbles know. If I change the focus from what I didn't know to who did, the bubbles, I had my solution. And I followed the bubbles up, the slow ones, the little ones, because they go up slow, then give your lungs time to adjust. And I made my way up to the surface. And that, my friends, is why I'm still alive to talk to you today. I changed the focus to find the solution. Now, I just mentioned my daddy. I wasn't being folksy. My father has a story, which he told me when I was young, which has affected me for the rest of my life. When my father was in college, he was on the swim team. And he was at a college party. And up walked Moose, big, powerful Moose, the state wrestling champion. And Moose decided to tease my father about the fact that swimming was not a real sport. And Moose teased mercilessly. He talked about all sorts of things about it and basically tried to emasculate my father in front of the entire party. My father smiled and said, "Okay, Moose, I'll take you on." The people at the party were terrified. "Ray, this is the head of the state wrestling team. He's a champion. He will rip you to shreds. He'll kill you." My father said, "I'm not worried." They said, "Ray, don't let your macho get in your way. This man is the state wrestling champ. You haven't a chance." And my father said, "Yes, I do." So the two of them went down to the gym and proceeded to go inside. And my father went a different direction than Moose. And Moose said, "What are you doing? The mats are this way." And my father smiled and said, "Oh no, Moose, your sport, my turf. The pool is this way." And so father and Moose went down to the pool. In order to be in a lower weight class, wrestlers starve every ounce of fat off their bodies, which means they have zero buoyancy. So when they got in the pool, Moose sank and struggled desperately just to get to the surface so he could breathe. And very quickly, Moose, the state wrestling champ, who everyone had told my father was going to rip him apart, was begging to be saved. And my father took Moose to the side of the pool and saved his life. And Moose never said another word about how swimmers weren't in a real sport. When you face a problem, when you face a challenge of any type, remember, your sport, my turf. Face the problems on your grounds. Don't let the problems take control. That's a David and Goliath story, isn't it? But how many of you really have thought about what happened in the story of David and Goliath? The two armies met, the Hebrew army and the Philistine army, met on the plains. And as was traditional at the time, rather than have massive numbers of soldiers die, it was traditional for each party to send forth a champion. And whoever's champion defeated the others would be the winning army and victorious and win the day. The Hebrews agreed to this, and then the Philistines sent forth Goliath, a giant of a man, probably looking a lot like Andre the Giant for you wrestling fans, about 6 or 7 feet tall, strong, huge muscles, arms like ham hocks, with a sword that reached so far that before anyone could get close to him, he would cut them down. And the Hebrew soldiers looked around, and there was no one of Goliath's size. There was no one who was able to face that giant long sword. It was certain death. And they didn't know. They had to choose a champion. And suddenly, a young shepherd lad stepped forward and said, "I'll fight him." And the Hebrews were torn between sympathy for this young man who was prepared to die to save their lives and relief that they weren't the ones who were going to face that giant sword, those huge arms, that tall, powerful man. And the king said, "There's not much I can do for you, but I have the best armor in the army. Put on my suit of armor." And David said, "No, that'll just slow me down." He's crazy, they thought, but at least it's not me. But what they didn't realize was that David, as a shepherd, had brought down many a wolf to protect his flocks using a sling. And so David stepped forth on the field, far away from where Goliath was, and loaded rock into his sling. And he started to spin the sling faster and faster and faster and faster. And he let loose that bullet. That rock hit Goliath in the forehead with the force of a bullet, long before Goliath's long sword was anywhere near David. And Goliath went down. David won the battle. Now, some of you who are religious may believe that David won the battle because he had God's favor. And I'm sure that God's favor didn't hurt. But David won because Goliath brought a sword to a gunfight. When you face a problem, do you realize it's a gunfight and not a knife fight? Do you bring different tools, or do you let the tradition get in your way? My friends, change the focus from that long sword. Don't take the sport of sword fighting without realizing to use your own turf, and never bring a sword to a gunfight. Now, let me give you an example, a chance for you to work through these kinds of problems. Every now and then, a truck won't realize how tall it is, and it will get caught under a bridge and wedged in. It can't get out. It can't back out. It can't go forward. How do you solve the problem? Lots of spectators will come forward and they'll tell you how to solve the problem, which involves basically lifting the bridge. You can't lift a bridge. Or slicing the top off of the truck, which is long, slow, hard, and very, very damaging if you can do it at all. They can't move. They can't change. So how do you solve the problem? The answer is, and this happens actually a lot, you let the air out of the tires. You don't concentrate up here. You let the air out, the truck goes down, and then you can back out. So when you face a problem, don't focus here. Don't focus here. Look at the whole picture and see what else you can change, what you can do differently. That's how you solve a problem. Now, I promised you a little bit of background on my father and the invention of the barcode. My father was an engineer, and he was a brilliant engineer as far as I'm concerned, but I'm his son. I'm kind of a little biased. But the invention of the barcode didn't require engineering acumen at all. It actually required about 3 seconds of my father's time, and yet it revolutionized the world. My father, basically speaking, my father was going down from lunch at work, and he stopped by his friend Frank Stite's office. "What are you doing for lunch, Frank?" "Nothing, I'm free." "Let's go to lunch." So they went down, and my father said, "So, what you working on?" "I'm working on a way to identify railroad cars. You see, when one company's cars ride on another company's tracks, they pay a toll. And they identify those cars by numbers written on the side. Well, let's face it, it's a union job. And the guys who read them are kind of old, they're kind of squinty-eyed, and they're close enough to retirement in many cases. They really don't care if they invert a few numbers. So the National Railroad Association has said, can you find a way to identify the cars automatically? And my father said, okay, how's it going? And Frank said, I've got colored strips. And when the train goes by, I've got a little reader that reads the strips and reads the numbers that they represent and identifies the cars. Sounds great, says my father. Yeah, said Mr. Stites, but there's a problem. The problem is the cars go by so fast that everything blurs. And I've tried everything. I've tried faster computers. I've tried better algorithms, tighter sensors. Nothing works. I can't beat it. It's impossible. My father smiled and said, well, here's what you do, Frank. You take these strips and you turn them sideways. And then you read down at your own pace as the train goes by. That was enough of a change to make the barcode work. Not a long time, but he didn't concentrate on how do you do this faster. That was the problem. He said, how do I keep that from being a necessary problem to solve? Now, for those of you who are wondering, my father worked for Sylvania full-time at the time, and this was the Sylvania project, so he got paid a $25 bonus. And then Sylvania made some mistakes in the applicable implementation. The company went to part-time, and so my father, the inventor of the barcode, actually lost money on the deal. So don't always think that things are going to work out for you just because you had a clever invention. But he had pride in it forever. And by the way, if you're wondering, my father brought me into the office occasionally while that was going on. And while I was there, he had me type some numbers into the computer. So technically speaking, I worked on the invention of the barcode. Part of the point of this story is the change, but it's also that not always the experts are the ones who know what's going on. In fact, sometimes the experts get it very wrong. And to really further embarrass the world, I'm going to talk about at least 2 occasions where monkeys were smarter than people. They did a very simple experiment. They wanted to see, basically speaking, if apes were smart enough to put things together. So they brought in a small monkey and they hung a bunch of bananas high up, higher than the monkey could reach. And they put a bunch of boxes into the room to see if the monkey was smart enough to stack one box on top of another, on top of another, to make stairs so that he could reach the bananas. You think the monkey did that? No. The monkey went over, grabbed the hand of the tallest researcher with his clipboard, pulled him over to underneath the bananas, climbed up the researcher, and grabbed the bananas easily. I don't know what they proved, except the researchers don't always know what they're doing. That's not the only time researchers have underestimated monkeys. There is a wonderful experiment where they knew that chimpanzees were afraid of fire. For those of you who are not aware of it, although chimpanzees are our closest living relatives, they cannot swim. So what they did was they put a chimpanzee on a raft, gave him a bucket, and lit the raft on fire to see if he was smart enough to take the bucket, dip it in the water, and put out the fire. You know what the chimpanzee did? He urinated on the fire. Not a solution you probably would come up with, but you know what? He wasn't forced in the focus that you have. He used his own. Now, the last story I'm going to tell you is about a man who was condemned to death. There was a prince who was a spoiled brat, and he had decided that he was going to marry the fairest woman in town. Well, that woman had her eyes on a very smart young man, and the prince condemned the man to death for having the effrontery to steal the woman from him. But there was a law in that kingdom that said, if a man is condemned to death, you put 2 slips of paper into a hat, one of which says death, and the other one says life. What the heck, he said, I'm the prince. This one says death too. No matter what he draws, he's going to have to die. And he bragged to the young lady who had his affection. She ran to her swain and said, no matter what you draw, it's going to be death. You can't win. And the gentleman smiled. She said, don't you understand? You're going to die. He said, no, I'm not. And so they gave him the hat. And he reached in to pull out the slip. Are you guys looking at the slip? Why? You know, that's a disaster. He threw it away, ripped it up and threw it away. And they said, so what did it actually say? He said, well, I don't know. I didn't look at it, but I know it's the opposite of what's left. Think about when you solve a problem. What else is going on? Don't focus on the one thing. Don't focus on the bridge. Don't focus on the long arms.
What's that?
Change the focus. Find the
Oh, okay.
solution. Mr. Toastmaster.